Hello? Can everybody see the screen now? Tesla's chart. So we're going to do Tesla's chart tonight. We do a new chart here. Let me just walk through this for everybody. Okay. Whether it's a horary chart or a mundane chart or a natal chart, I mean, it's a really good idea to put the subject in. So we do that, and then I tab. I use the tab key a lot because it moves from field to field. So now I can take and enter the date. I'll go 07, and then I'm going to hit either the arrow key or a dot or a backslash. It doesn't make any difference. And it moves it to the next field. Okay, then I'm going to go down and I'm going to override the atlas here. I'm going to click override atlas, and I'm going to clear the place. I'm going to highlight New Mexico, clear it, and tab. And that automatically clears the city. Then I'm going to go down and I'm going to put in the latitude, longitude. Now, the latitude and longitude for Tesla I got from Wikipedia, because he was born in the town called Smidgen in the Austrian Empire. Well, it's now in Croatia. So you can go look up Smidgen. You just Google it and you'll find plenty of information on it. Even though only about 450 people live in Smidgen, Nikola Tesla was born there. It's a famous place. Then 15E19. 15E19. Tab. Now I can hit the enter key or go chart, and there's the chart. And you can type in city, comma, state on the same line. If I was going to do London, England, I'd just go London. I'm not worrying about capitalization. I'm just trying to London, England. Hit the tab key, and there it goes. It finds United Kingdom, London, longitude, latitude, and all that stuff. So, okay, so here's Tesla's chart. So here's the place he was born, Smidgen, Croatia, which is, at the time was the Austrian Empire. Renee,
Yes.
Can you talk about this guy? Do you know much about his life?
I've got a really nice biography about him. His first invention was in 1882. In the biography, when he was 4 years old, his father was in the ministry in the Orthodox Church.
That's at 4 years old?
At 4 years old, he invented a water wheel. He had an older brother, 7 years older, who was proclaimed to be extremely brilliant. And so this older brother died in an accident when Nikola was only 7 or 8 years old. His mother never learned to read or write, but she was extremely inventive in the family with all kinds of inventions, etc. She was the only women in his life were his mother and his sisters.
Yeah, well, his Mercury has just moved over to conjunct his Saturn.
In the third house.
In the third house. And of course, those are his brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
Got several planets in that house, so his siblings had a big impact on his life.
His Neptune in Pisces in the 12th house is actually his best planet. No planets in any of his public houses. His worst society was companionship, and his worst trinity was wealth.
Right. What I read in Wikipedia was that he did make quite a bit of money from his patents, but he spent it all pretty quickly on his own experiments.
And he died
just like
very
you said.
Impoverished.
Yeah.
It seems, Uranus is such a planet of change, and he's got it in his first house. I really thought about his childhood. He suffered with hallucinations. He couldn't know what was reality in childhood. He was extremely shy. but he loved nature. Right after his brother died, he moved and had to live with a relative, and he contacted malaria. In the home, there was a lot of love in his sisters and his mother. His father wanted him to go into the ministry.
So if his father's the 10th house, you know, that's that Saturn influence, but he's got Cancer in the 4th, so that sort of goes along with what you're saying. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking backwards. Well, normally the 10th house is the mother and the 4th house is the father.
Okay, and he's got the sun on his nadir
Yeah.
there. So that might emphasize the strength of the father, right?
Yeah, I would think so, especially with just having the sun there.
And it's conjunct Venus as well, so there might have been a real strong love connection with his father.
Could be.
His relationship with his father?
From what I gathered, there was a very strong, profound relationship. He was obsessed with excelling to the point it was damaging his health, and so his father had sort of made light of all of his achievements because he didn't want to feed into Nikola's
drivenness
and prove himself that he had made the right choice by going into science rather than the ministry. So all of the miracles in the Bible, he really wanted to explain scientifically. You know, he was torn literally from religion into science in his life.
That's really
He
interesting.
had an obsession with flying.
It's interesting. He's got Moon conjunct Mars in Libra, and they're intercepted in the 6th house. And then he's got Jupiter in Aries intercepted in the 12th, opposing Mars, but opposing the Moon.
And you know what? I just was so fascinated with looking at Uranus.
With his asterodynes, where does Uranus fall? Power.
But it's low on the power, considering it's in the 1st house. Think about Uranus in his chart as just signifying all the changes that his inventions gave to humanity. Like he was a scientist.
Right, 1882. He has
Says Mercury.
See the Mercury at 8 degrees here? 30 trine Jupiter. Trine is natal Jupiter.
And if you transit Uranus, it has just entered his 6th house of work.
Right here.
It sextiles his natal Venus in the 3rd house of science. Think that's significant, that transit from Uranus to Venus?
Well,
It's pretty loose.
I'm sure it has.
Or that Uranus just entered the 6th house. It seems like whenever Uranus makes some little change in a person's chart, I feel like it's worth investigating.
Oh yeah.
But when you say just entered, there's like an 11-degree difference there, right? And Uranus is a slow-moving planet, so it can take years to go 11 degrees.
Well, yeah, Renee. Well, what Zane says is that those transits act like triggers.
Yeah,
Although
it's,
for the very slow-moving planets, you know.
But it's half a degree. It's within half a degree of that sextile she's talking about.
Uranus and Venus.
14, yeah.
You're talking about. Yeah, it's sextile.
Yeah. But we would look for some progressions to be exacerbating that trigger, wouldn't we?
Well, it's the Mercury. Mercury is moved to square Jupiter. I mean, trine Jupiter. That's the aspect. That's the major progressed aspect.
Right.
Is
I
Mercury
see.
trine natal Jupiter.
Right.
It's kind of hard to see with all.
And so, but I guess I've always held on to the outer planets transits are more notable. Like
In this particular thing, he invented the rotating field induction motor and alternating current system of power transmission, which is, of course, what we use today still. And, of course, we use electric motors all over the place. He was a very smart guy. So that was 1882, and he was 20. He was only 28, 26 years old or something. It happens when you're young, I guess, like Einstein.
He also has a sextile from transiting Neptune to his sun. At the same time, Uranus is making a sextile to Venus.
To notice, that would spark his imagination.
Didn't Sane call Neptune the planet of genius?
Yes, he did.
Although a lot of people feel that way about Uranus as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Uranus is sort of associated with eccentricity, genius eccentrics, which he certainly would qualify as. But with Uranus in his first house, you would expect that to be a earmark of his personality.
The Taurus in his chart with on his ascendant, and he was so determined to overcome any issues with his willpower.
That decadent of Taurus. It's interesting, it's always interesting, I think, to look at the decadents that their important planets are in. And the ascendant, that first decadent of Taurus has a lot to do with... Here, let me read you what Zane says. And because that's the decadent of Lepus, the hare. That's
The first of Taurus.
first one of Taurus, right. They symbolize the thought that timidity is the greatest bar to advancement of those born under this first decadent. Being the first decadent of the sign naturally ruling the house of money, there's a tendency to devote too much energy to the acquisition of wealth. And as this decadent is particularly mediumistic, those born under it easily acquire magical powers. Hence, the various traditions regarding it as a place of black magic. Zane talks about the fact that it's opposite, that first decadent, the Halloween decadent of Scorpio. Yet, its children become adepts at white magic just as easily if they would overcome the lust for material things. Those born here have a great natural healing power, ability to crystallize conditions to their desires by the power of their imagination. Well, yeah, and it's the decadent of determination, too. Okay.
And yet, he's not known to have had a sex life, is he? Did you read anything about that, Renee?
Only that the women in his life were his mother and sisters. And he loved to be in intelligent women's company. You know, at times when he had a little bit of money, he loved to have dinner parties and he would cook himself and things like that.
Huh.
But, I mean, Capricorn on his MC, it goes, but the MC isn't quite Cygnus, it's the second decadent of Capricorn, but, you know, Cygnus is the swan, and that he has been always admired the geese. And he did live to 87, and he had a couple of illnesses.
He's got that moon conjunct Mars in the 6th house. His next big thing, well, he moves to America in 1884. So let's see. Zane says he's got a Jupiter ruler of his 9th at square Saturn, square progressed Saturn,
Yeah.
and the Sun is semisextile Venus, ruler of his 4th house. So he moves to the U.S. and he goes to work for Edison Company, Thomas A. Edison. But wireless was the big thing that was coming into play. So he says 1891 invented Tesla wireless system. Let me check that with Wikipedia here. On 30 July 1891, at the age of 35, he became a naturalized citizen, established his laboratory in New York, and patented the Tesla coil. Okay, he lit electric lamps wirelessly at both locations, demonstrating the potential for wireless power transmission. So I guess that's what he did.
Uranus is, by transit, making a pretty well perfect trine to 22 natal Mercury.
Yeah. So these are just the transits here in natal. So Uranus transit is at 27 something of Libra, applying to trine his Mercury in the third house. Yeah, that's right. And then let's see what he has for major progressions. Mercury square Uranus. Yes.
A lot of these progressions, maybe around his inventions, may have, you see all the planets are moving through his fifth house. He, all kinds of inventions are speculation. He was so sure of himself, but anyone else would have considered them speculation. Everything he had went into the invention or the discovery.
Well, I would think so. All those progressed aspects in there. Yeah, in fact, a lot of it was speculation. And what he actually did this year, same year that he became a naturalized citizen, he did wireless power transmission. Okay? But what he was really wanting to do was wireless communication. That was the big thing. And in the end, Marconi beat him to it. But he he tried to do transatlantic communication, and he got J.P. Morgan. And with regard to the fifth house, there's quite a lot of. There's so much in his life here. It's hard. In 1900 he gets $150,000, which is $4.25 million in today's dollars. And he got 51% of that. So he had built up some money. He had built up the equivalent of $2 million. A lot through his patents. And then he borrowed another $2.2 million from J.P. Morgan. And he began planning this thing called the Wardenclyffe Tower. And the idea was he was going to build this powerful transmitter that could go across the Atlantic, like radio.
Yeah.
I think that's what he was thinking. He was building this huge tower.
Does radio go that far? Radio waves go straight out, and they won't go around the curvature of the Earth, will they?
Well, they might have to bounce off something. I don't think he ever did this. This is just what he wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And then in the end, but in December of 1901, Marconi successfully transmitted the letter S from England to Newfoundland. But in the meantime, he lost his money. So he started building this giant tower and facility, and then later approached Morgan for more money to build a more powerful transmitter. And Morgan asked him where all the money had gone. And Tesla responded by saying that he was affected by the panic of 1901, which means, I guess, that the money had been invested. He says he was affected by the panic of 1901, which he, J.P. Morgan, had caused.
Tesla told Morgan that?
Yes. And Morgan was shocked by the reminder of his part in the stock market crash. And by Tesla's breach of contract by asking for more funds. Well, needless to say, he never got any more money. And he went for years trying to get money out of J.P. Morgan. I thought that was interesting since you brought up the fifth house thing. So there was speculation, and of course, the fact that people like J.P. Morgan would invest huge sums of money in these things, is speculation.
That was the one he built in Colorado Springs, that huge tower that was
I've
blown
heard
up.
there's some Russian engineer scientists that are wanting to recreate that very tower you're talking about, Paul. Now.
Well, I'm not sure where this is. He spent time in Colorado Springs. So from for a couple of years, I guess, he was in Colorado Springs.
Doing his lightning and death ray experiments. and stuff, I think. That's
Well, later on, there were some death ray kind of experiments.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was into all kinds of stuff. He told reporters he was conducting wireless telegraphy experiments.
Oh, it's on Long Island.
The Wycliffe thing? Or the Wardenclyffe? Yeah. That's later. But he did something in Colorado Springs where he
built a huge tower.
He transmitting signals from Pikes Peak to Paris. Now, citation is needed here. I really don't know, and this is all wireless, okay, and where this fits in with the telegraph, which is not wireless, but must have been already around for quite a while, and then radio, which of course is wireless, and radio transmissions, and shortwave radio, and ham radio, and all that stuff. Well, anyway, this was the beginning of all that stuff.
His progressed ascendant is conjunct his, applying to conjunct his natal Mercury. There is a square between his progressed moon in the 2nd and his progressed Mercury in the 6th.
Paul, I was
Yes.
wondering if you do you put any stock in the planet, like the sun, being much more powerful as it enters another sign?
I don't know.
I haven't read that this day, and I've read that elsewhere.
I'm not familiar with that. So tell me more about that.
From what I've read, anything that moves, especially one of the luminaries, if we're looking at 29 degrees of a sign or 0 degrees of a sign, that their power is magnified during that time, so that any aspects they would be making would just take on greater power during that time. That's about all it amounts to. Well, I read it about progressed luminaries is what I've read. Yeah.
Okay.
That makes some sense. Well, and here we're looking up this is in his 5th house. We were talking about the house of speculation. And if the sun shifting signs tighten his belt, if he lost his money this year, that progressed sun moving into Virgo might have had him tighten his belt by a few notches.
Virgo is science.
It's opposing the progressed midheaven, but that just moves with it along the chart. But that's the interesting thing is the midheaven is at 29 degrees Aquarius, while the sun's at 0.
Right.
So that's maybe I don't know, that took on more power during that time.
Well, let's see. They're just out of orb, and they always stay just out of orb. But I would look to Saturn, for it's sort of a failed business deal.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it was sort of a failed business deal. He goes to J.P. Morgan. He asks for more money. He offends Morgan. Morgan tells him to go jump in the lake, and that's the end of the deal. And he spends a lot of time. So that's sort of that. Probably the main aspect he has to Saturn is the Venus sextile Saturn. That's
the progression
that's
there?
applying there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So he's got Mercury aspects, 1901.
Progress Jupiter conjunct natal Jupiter. Progress Mars trine natal Venus. And the ascendant conjunct natal Mercury.
And then let's see what happens if we add parallels. I like to look at parallels last because it's parallel aspects, it's easier for a parallel aspect to form than it is for other things.
Oh. Just because wherever they are, they have to be on the same plane.
Pretty much.
Uh-huh.
There's only like 23s, there's only 46 degrees, 23 up, 23 down. Vicky has done a lot of work with parallels and thinks they're important, and so does Zane. But I always kind of ignore them because it's too much. It's too much information.
Mhm.
And if you take out the weaker ones, there's no Saturn aspects except for these that, you know, they last forever, so they don't count. But there's plenty of stuff going on with Mars and Venus, and
It seems like the contraparallels would be just as important as the parallels.
yeah. Well,
Look at that midheaven contraparallel natal ascendant. I would think that might
Right
be a
here.
pretty powerful thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's by Sutton. I have a little pamphlet on parallels, specifically about parallels to the ascendant and the MC. I think it's by Dennis Sutton.
no, it's not Dennis Sutton. It's
Oh,
this guy who used to be, I can't remember his name.
okay.
He's
Yeah, I
published
know.
several books. And he was a Church of Light person, but way back, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
decades.
That's we've got both. We've got ascendant contraparallel natal MC in February of '87, and then and almost a half years later, we've got midheaven contraparallel natal ascendant. They switched places.
Yeah, we talked about marriage. You know, I mean, he's got a pretty powerful Mars and Venus. I mean, I haven't looked at his aspects, but if I look at his, see this right here? He's got this Moon conjunct Mars in there. They're square.
Square Venus.
Venus and Sun, 14, 17, 14,
Right.
18.
Yeah.
And that's the thing
Wow.
that struck me as, you know, one of the more powerful influences in his life. But
Yeah.
the two social planets square each other. But, you know, there's no, it's all electricity and his whole life. He did so many
And
things.
they're in mutual reception.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Wow, they sure are.
Libra.
The Moon and Venus are in mutual reception. I'm
He
going.
would only very rarely supposedly ever talk about the loneliness of his life.
Yeah, well, and you know, he'd left his family and his relatives back in
The old country.
the old country. I mean, he took off on his own and never went. You know. Now, you know, of course, this chart. You know, Christopher didn't want to do the chart because he's a stickler for
Exactly.
wanting AA charts. I think the time comes from him. I believe his mother told him you were born just at or before the stroke of midnight. So I used 11:59. So I used July 9th, and some people have his birth as July 10th. But they're only a couple of minutes apart. You know, it's the same chart. And I don't know, when I saw that, you know, the Uranus in the first house and the Pluto and the Taurus and all that, it just sort of
Seemed right.
sounded like him, and what the heck. Hey, it's somebody's chart for sure. We've delineated somebody's chart.
Yeah, you know, and that there was a lightning storm, of course, was really remembered.
Right, that would certainly be appropriate for a guy like Tesla.
Yeah.
So, we've got a few minutes left here. I want to mention that this is the last class for this series. Then, Christopher's going to start up again January 29th. He says, there's going to be 6 sessions from January 29th to February 26th. It's about relationships. Why and why not? The astrology of compatibility. Well, Barbara retired. And
Oh, Barb.
yeah, Barb. Barb retired and moved to Santa Cruz. She's worked for the Church of Light for years. So she retired, and she was the one that used to woman the camera. And so now what we're doing till we find somebody else to do that. If you're on Church of Light TV, you don't You just get to listen and watch because nobody's over there monitoring the thing to see if there's any questions. Anybody got anything else they want to say or questions or
Renee
what?
had the chart of his death. It would be interesting to look at the progressions for his death.
Yes.
That's in January 7th, 1943. He passed on. But he was 87 years old.
Yeah, pretty old man.
Now, you know, he always lived in hotels. His whole life, he lived in a hotel. And he died in a hotel. And I was wondering about that sun in the fourth house, if that was sort of like living in a hotel. No. When you got money, you live in the nice hotel. It's very grandiose. When you don't have any money, you move to the seedy hotel. Where he died, I don't know.
I think one hotel just kind of, signed up to put him up through his extreme poverty.
Yeah,
they weren't going to throw him out at that point. He got to, but it was a very Spartan lifestyle that he was living at that point. Really like a monk or something.
Somewhere in New York was his last hotel of residence.
I think you might
be right.
Yes,
it might. In fact, it might be.
Interesting. Mars and the Moon are there in the 8th.
It's Wikipedia says that on January 7th, 1943, Tesla, 86, died alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel. His body was later found by maid Alice Monahan after she entered Tesla's room, ignoring the do not disturb sign that Tesla had placed on his door 2 days earlier.
Wow.
Coronary thrombosis, according to the medical examiner.
In a progressed chart, would Mars and the Moon stay in the same relationship and move at the same rate? Don't they move at different rates when they're progressing?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So they happened to come around to being within 2 degrees of each other.
Transiting Uranus is right at, it's just about 1 degree of Gemini. It's made the whole circuit because it takes 84 years for Uranus to travel. While I was reading in the Sacred Tarot about the transit of Uranus taking 84 years and being the closest to the length of a good human life. It's gone around once and then retrograde. It's coming back there to 0 degrees Gemini, which...
Yeah. Yeah. Well, picking, looking at death is, it doesn't, when you're 86 years old and it's 1943, it doesn't take much. It's not like there's a tragic accident or anything.
Right.
It's just the moon touches something and boom, you're gone.
Look at how his I guess that would be his transiting midheaven is down there in its nadir.
The transiting midheaven, is opposite the sun up there.
He's in a Pluto square, too.
Are we looking at the transits or the progressions? And Pluto's there in his 4th house by transit. So that could be a end of things.
Yeah, end of life.
Too. Mm-hmm.
But I got to go. And this was a lot of fun. As usual, you guys were great. And thank you for being so participatory.